Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the live stream today. We're going to be getting some interesting discussions here, and please remember to ask any questions that you have for Doug in the comments below. We would love, this is why we do this, for interactions and for for people to...
Don't want to leave you left out. They can ask you a question.
They can ask me a question. If it's about Bon Jovi or like 80s rock or...
Hair glam.
Hair glam, yeah. I've seen Bon Jovi 9 times in concert, so...
Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
9 times.
Oh yeah.
Dave Matthews, I've probably seen that many times.
Really?
Yes. So
Yeah.
Dave Matthews is, to me, as Bon Jovi is to you. So.
Okay. He's an amazing musician. I don't listen to a ton of their stuff, but he's an amazing musician.
If you like, he's an acquired taste for some people, but if you have like, if you love jamming and guitar play and drums, I mean, just the instrumental side of it, which is really fun. So, yeah.
That's how I talk about Bruce Springsteen. I love Bruce Springsteen, but before that, I didn't like him because of his voice. I was like, man, that guy cannot sing at all. And then it definitely grew on me, his lyrics and everything like that.
Have you heard his Christmas song?
Yeah, Santa Claus is coming to town.
It's so weird.
It's so weird.
It's like so weird.
Oh, man. All right, Doug, well, we're going to get right into it. Some things that we're going to be talking about. But one of my favorite things I like to do with you is I find quotes on like Instagram and stuff, and then I like put them on here and then get your reaction.
They never tell me what the quotes are going to be.
Yeah. Oh, and then another thing too is that on this board, I want to get like hit one of these buttons as like a correct answer, like Doug approves or Doug disapproves. But yeah, we're going to get right into it. So one of the things is, and you've talked about this before actually, and so our first quote, and again, guys, please feel free to comment below, ask any question that you want in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube or watching on Facebook. And so, Doug, the first one that we have is, our brains are wired for connection, but trauma rewires them for protection.
Right. Well, what happens, well, especially if it's like relational trauma, the brain, the very thing that is supposed to protect us, the very thing, you know, like we are the one species that when we're born, we cannot take care of ourselves. Like we need an adult to care for us. And so if we go through a lot of experiences where adults are not taking care of us, or chaotically they are taking care of us. So maybe in some moments they're taking care of us, but other moments they're a threat and dangerous and stuff like that. Our brain starts to make these associations that adults are not, are not safe for us, or not reliable as a way to care for us or to protect us or whatever. I mean, our brain is ultimately always wired for survival. I mean, that's how our main goals in life is to stay alive and procreate, and keep our genes going. And so our brain is heightened for things that are going to threaten that. And so if we have all this relational trauma, then, we certainly are not going to lean on adults very easily or people just to care for us and to help us. And so, we try to create new associations that counters that, like, counters that association that we give them a new experience.
Yeah. So can you briefly, for the audience, kind of in your own or clinical terms, what trauma is? So someone going through trauma.
Well, I mean, trauma would be any life event that, if you're looking at the DSM, it's an experience or an event that, threatens the integrity of our life, right? We fear not surviving, and our life becomes threatened, and to where it creates a lot of symptoms related to re-experiencing those life events, where it kind of keeps us on edge and heightened and always worried about these life events continuing to happen. SAMHSA has a good description using this thing called the 3 E's. So event, you have to have an event, but we like to think of it more specifically as when those events happen certainly impact how we're going to experience that event. So, if I experience a traumatic event at age 18, it's going to be a much different experience than if I'm an infant and I experience that trauma. Yeah. And much of that has to do with where our brain is in development and what systems are being organized and stuff like that. So, typically if we experience traumas at adults, our trauma reactions are often more situation specific. So we might not go to a specific neighborhood, or we might not go around certain people, like certain identified people. Yep. Whereas if we experience trauma in our formative years when we're really developing and our brain's organized, then we start to generalize to everything. So we don't want to be around people at all, or we just don't want to go out of the house because everywhere is dangerous and threatening.
Yeah.
But you have to have an event. Then it is really up to or it's not the event that makes it traumatic, but it's how we experience that event. So like, for example, divorce to you might be, man, I'm so glad my parents got divorced. That's made life so much better. But to the next person, it's really traumatic and overwhelming. So how we experience that trauma is an impact, and then the effect it has on our life. Does it impair our functioning? Does it, cause problems? But there's a lot of different examples of what could be considered trauma. Most people think of like the big T's, we call it. We refer to as the big T's. So, abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse, any of those types of assaults that we would consider really big T's. But little T's, like losing a pet, or divorce of parents, or just having experiences that, just really change our life in such a way that it really makes it hard for us to function and cope.
Yeah. So basically, to the brain, it would be something that the brain perceives as a threat to survival.
Yeah, and that we're not able to kind of recover from. So, for example, just because an event that we would consider to be traumatic happens, but if we have what's going to really determine whether something is traumatic or not is how people respond and react to us through this traumatic event. If people are panicking and freaking out, not really handling it very well, then, that certainly can be traumatic. But if we have strong relational health and a lot of good support and people are just for example, one of my kids lost her babysitter. And that was really, it certainly has affected her in certain ways, but we just let her talk that experience out. She'll be playing and she'll just start talking about death and loss and everything like that through her play. And we don't try to stop that. We just allow her to talk about it, because it's our brain's way of just trying to really process it out and make sense of it. Where I think we struggle with things that are considered traumatic is we do everything in our power to not experience it. So it ends up making the traumatic memory stronger and more impactful in a negative way. So for my daughter's example, it certainly has impacted her, especially soon after that, but she's processing it at her own time, her own place, and we provide her a lot of relational support through that whole process, that allows her to work through it in a healthy way.
So I'm curious, with her toys and stuff, how did she act that out?
Just with dolls and, her Barbies and things like that. So there's always, someone who's, dying or things like that, and talks about those subjects and things like that. And then that can probably freak people out when they see their kid kind of talking those out and think it's more harmful than it is. But no, it's actually, that's why play therapy can be very effective for young children, because we reenact our experiences through play. So it allows the brain to process that memory and work through it. Wow. And, ultimately, truly the only way we work through traumatic memories or trauma is to revisit those memories in such a way that we can create a tolerance for those memories. Yeah. So the only way we can create a tolerance for those memories is we have to revisit those memories in a predictable, moderate and safe way, a controlled way. I'm going to do it on my own terms and stuff like that. So for example, the first thing might be, I might have taken my kid and thrown her right into therapy and make her talk about the loss. That wouldn't have been in a predictable, moderate and controlled way. I wouldn't have given my daughter choice in how she's going to process those memories. So oftentimes we don't want to just think we know what's best and then do it because we think we know what's best, and not get the kids, if we don't give that kid the opportunity to have a voice and control in how they want to deal with that.
That's interesting, because I feel like if I had a kid and they were going through that, my first thing would be to put them in therapy. But that's interesting, you saying that, giving them a natural way that they can play that out themselves while you're there with them, or
and supporting and providing that safe environment. And that's typically, especially right after the trauma. So the trauma, PTSD, doesn't really happen until 6 months, where you can actually get the diagnosis, because you've we kind of joke, it's people, you're only allowed, in the DSM, you're only allowed a month to grieve, the loss of somebody, or to deal with it before it becomes a disorder. And it's no, it should be as long as it takes. Yeah. So Kim has a comment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Kim.
Yes.
What if revisiting is a trigger for not good memories?
Sure. Well, and that's the challenge, is if you can create a predictable, controlled experience to revisit those traumas, you can do it in such a way that you start to build trauma. So you got to figure out, what is the size of the dose? What can I do? And then you also have to you have to be able to, what we would say is equip the clients you're working with the regulating capability to regulate themselves during those experiences. So really, ultimately, and I always tend to talk about with clients is, especially when I assess whether they have PTSD or not, is how often are they re-experiencing these experiences on their own? And a lot of times they're like 3, 4, 5 times a week. I'm like, you're already experiencing it in unpredictable ways, which is what makes us sensitized to those memories.
Okay.
So when we don't see them coming, when we don't know when they're going to happen, that makes our brain more sensitized to those trauma memories. But if we can do it, if we can expose or revisit those memories in a predictable way, like we're going to schedule it. We're going to schedule a time, and we're going to outline what do we want to put in place to help that person feel safe in revisiting those memories. So giving the person control to revisit those memories.
Well, would one example be a predictable way where, like, Kim's asking this question, but if it was something like going to therapy, like, and you're going to talk about it, is that a predictable way to say, I don't like talk about or revisiting it, but could that be one example of having a predictable thing where I'm going to therapy on Tuesday and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to be prepared for it. I know I'm talking about it, instead of it coming up in unpredictable ways in conversation.
Right. We're going to schedule it. We're going to, and oftentimes the best way to make it predictable is this is how we're going to revisit it. So for example, and
so you telling her, hey, here's what I'm going to ask. Here's what we're going to talk about.
This is how we're going to do it. We're going to revisit it through drawing, or we're going to revisit it through an EMDR, the eye movement kind of process.
What's that about? Because I know I have someone that has went through that in therapy, the eye movement. But how does that help someone?
It allows your brain to revisit the memories in a safe way, and then reduce the intensity of that memory. But then it also allows your brain to
excuse me,
kind of work through the negative cognitive beliefs that really result from traumas, the shame statements, and the irrational beliefs we have about ourselves, and our lack of safety and things like that. So the other thing is, you bring is, like, oftentimes, like, sometimes the way we revisit the memory, so like talking about it isn't usually the most effective way to revisit that memory. Typically trauma is a sensory experience. It's a body experience. And so trying to revisit the memory in a way where your body can process that. Because what happens is, if I just talk at it at a cognitive level, all my lower systems that are more protective and fight or flight tend to kick in and take over, because you get overwhelmed by talking about it. So how can we create a way for people to process memory in a way that's not overwhelming? And things like that. You're welcome, Kim.
Yeah, thank you for commenting. That's so interesting to me. I'm kind of like I'm at a loss for words, because I'm just thinking about that. I've like experiencing it through sensory or through your body and stuff. So for me, I'm just curious about me now.
Of course.
So if, growing up, if I had a caretaker, like very kind of shaming to motivate me a lot, and then if I hear any type of shame or any kind of things that are similar to that, I talk about it a lot in therapy, or I talk about, like, not just with that, but other areas in my life. But how would that translate? How would someone revisit through their body shame or some type of a traumatic experience growing up?
Right. And so we might do, I know, like, so one of the models I use for trauma is called SITCAP. It's Structured Sensory Interventions for Traumatized Children, Adolescent, and Parents. So we call it SITCAP because it's less of a mouthful. And so one of the things is number one, we don't always have to do it, but we often debrief a traumatic memory. But then many of the sessions after are really about themes of trauma. So we will do, like, drawings related to the theme of shame. So, tell me about, like, so we might ask somebody, if shame was a symbol or an object, what would shame look like? If you could take shame out of your body, draw me a picture that would show me what shame looks like. And then we would just ask questions specifically about shame, like, what's the worst part about shame, or when do you experience this shame the most, and
Yeah.
what do you do when you experience shame, and things like that. So we help them process through those
Wow.
experiences.
Yeah, I would say if I don't know what I would draw, but like for shame for me would be the fact of being misunderstood and not having a chance to explain myself, or not being believed.
Okay.
That just
Yeah.
like, I putting agency on me that the reason why X has happened is because of a lack of, or that I'm bad, or that I'm spoiled, or that I'm lazy, all these
Right.
negative things that are put towards it. So that's interesting. That's kind of what I would say is like not having because I read something on Instagram too, that people that experience emotional neglect growing up, I don't know if it's for everyone, but this really hit me, where it's like you tend to over explain more
Sure.
because when you were younger, you weren't listened to.
Right.
So now you kind of look at it and
You want to make sure people understand you and you get
yeah.
your point across, right?
And you can be honest too. I don't know if you've noticed that about me yet. Me about over
every
explaining.
day. No, I'm just kidding. no, that's
Yeah,
fine.
but I do so much. And
Here's
then
the thing: I would never know because I like to listen. So it's
Okay.
I'd be like, okay, yeah, tell me more. Like,
Yeah.
let's go there. But yeah, and it's certainly these experiences shape us. They shape how we interact. They shape how we handle relational interactions. And so we feel like because so and so didn't believe me, no one else is going to believe
Yeah.
me. So I have to really emphasize my point and provide more evidence about why I feel the way I feel, or why I am the way I am, so that I know people are I gotta like give you so much evidence so that you can't possibly deny
Yes.
my experience.
Oh boy. Abby put down, yes, I agree, Tyler. Abby, if you're still watching, let me know what you agree about that. Or what you kind of, if you experience that growing up, or you tend to over explain, I want to know more about, your comment there. But absolutely, it's like, and I think that's why I might be a little more analytical about things, because I
Right.
want to put things in a way that no one could refute it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're anticipating, like the brain's a big predictor. It's a predicting machine. So, and every experience, I mean, you might, I mean, probably more so adults than anybody else probably know this, is you end up going into social situations and you start predicting in your brain what you think is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so then that affects the way you approach that interaction. So,
Yes.
especially if it's like somebody that I'm not comfortable with, I don't, I think this is going to happen. So you maybe censor yourself, or, or you over explain, or you know.
Well, you and Janice talked about that in one of the communication episodes, talking about how Janice was just saying when you try to control other people's realities, and then you just like you're trying to prepare for something that you cannot prepare for in that way, as
and
far as
most
know
of-
what someone's going to think or respond.
Most of what you predict is based on your past experience. It has nothing to do with the person you're with, especially when you're generalizing to other people. So it's, often, so I go back to, I think we've talked about this example where someone's looking over at you and you think that they're, looking at you for, because they want to like pick a fight, or they're upset with you, and you're like, and the other person doesn't have that same history as you, and you're like, I don't know why you think that. That doesn't,
Well, there have been times too, and Abby, let me know if you agree with this too, but there have been times where, and I see her comment, there have been times too where I will over explain, and then the person's kind of like, okay, like, I don't know why
I don't need all that information.
yeah, no, I feel even worse. So let's get Abby. Thank you so much for commenting. And so Abby says, I'm going to read from your iPad. Shame and why we over-explain. I always feel obligated to explain why I'm doing something when people aren't even looking for an explanation. Yeah.
So my question, or I wonder, this is my thought that I wonder, especially with people that have struggled with addiction or in recovery, is that there's probably a perpetual feeling that you have to prove to people that you're no longer struggling with addiction, or that you're clean. You got to always prove that you're not in active addiction. Because, think about probably her experience, especially going with the legal system, is no one trusts or believe you. So you have a lot of experiences in the height of your addiction that people don't believe you. People think that you're just trying to pull one over on you or whatever. And so you end up trying to overprove that that you're not, a liar, right? That I'm not a liar, right?
Yeah, yep.
No longer a liar.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that becomes...
Wow. Yeah, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to always, it just is. And it's just something where, because, I don't know, for me, over-explaining, I'm just trying to do a good job of giving someone the information. Yep, you are right, Doug. Yep. Well, thanks, Abby. Yeah, and let me know, is it exhausting for you to always having to be over-explaining yourself? Yeah, I'm sorry that you do that.
I won't recommend this, but you should just go like, do I have to prove that I'm, just ask.
That's true.
I just want to get it out of the way. Do I have to go and prove that I'm okay? Or
I wonder if I was even to say to some people, it's like, I feel like I have to prove to you that I'm saying the truth. Do I need to do that?
Right? Do you? Yeah.
But isn't that kind of relying on someone that would be honest with you?
Ultimately, I think about we're putting together a wellness pack that we want people to connect with, and one of the things I have in there is like, okay, well, what are the things you can control? What are the things you can't control, and what are the things you can influence? Like, you can't control whether someone believes you or not, and so you can't get lost in this need to prove yourself to everybody. So you have to figure out, the best you can do is focus on what what you know about what you can accomplish and what you can control. Yeah. And that's,
Yeah, that's so hard because ultimately you can't control if they're going to believe you or not. You can give the facts.
You can influence, I suppose, by giving that evidence, but ultimately then you have to ask, like, if it's really hard to control or to convince, then whose issue is it? Right? Is it my issue, or like, am I not explaining it right, or is it that person really protecting themselves, not wanting to, that those are issues they're dealing with? I don't want to believe you because if I believe you, I might get hurt.
Yeah.
And, so there's some probably repair that needs to happen, and, and some amends and some dealing with those resentments and all that type of stuff. But
man, that brings up, Abby, if you're still listening, that brings up for me and telling you to this story, Doug, that at a previous job I was at, I remember being in a meeting and just being berated for something that I didn't do. And it felt like the beginning of the meeting wasn't, hey, what did you, they had heard things that I had said, and my view of everything was I was trying to be helpful in some way. I was not being disrespectful at all, but they had heard through other channels that there was back talk, that there was these things, and I'll never forget them yelling at us. There was two of us, me and someone else, and I just remember the whole time I'm at the edge of my seat waiting for them to stop and to get a word in edgewise to say, that is not what happened. And it's like that, man, that looking back now, that probably really triggered me.
Oh yeah.
For stuff that happened growing up.
Well, I told that story where like that person is like, what you did yesterday was not okay, and we're going to talk about it at noon. And I'm like, it's like 9 a.m. or something like that. And I'm like,
oh, yeah.
What? Like, you're going to make me stew on this for like 3 hours? That pisses me off. And I'm like, no, like,
I don't like that.
I got so pissed. And, it's just kind of that, I'm going to, so that goes back to it being an unpredictable situation. So you didn't know it was coming.
No.
They didn't say that, it was an unpredictable, it's a severe situation where they're shaming you in front of.
They had already drawn the conclusion
people.
too.
Yeah. And it's not controlled. Like, you're not in a controlled situation. You're not given any voice in the matter or opportunity to even, deal with it. So.
Yeah. Wow. And my girlfriend's watching this live stream too, and that it just makes me think of her and I, because she's a processor.
Yeah.
So when something happens with us, she wants to think about it, but I want to talk about it now. I don't
Right.
want to sit for an hour or 2 hours
Right.
and think about what she's thinking about and what she's processing. And so,
Well, that probably is why a lot of fights happen. Is that
Mm.
I want to have this conversation now because we can't let these things, whatever. And then you're like, I want to think about it, and I don't want to talk about it now. I'm not ready to talk about it now.
yeah, it's hard for me to wait.
It's almost like, is there any benefit to scheduling fights? Like, we have an issue, we have a problem. Let's
Hmm. Here we
schedule
go,
a
sweetie.
time where we could fight about this thing. And
Yeah.
I don't mean fight like, put your dukes up and start throwing
Yeah.
punches, but like all right, we have this issue of, Tyler doesn't clean the dishes or whatever, and I want to talk to him about it. Can we schedule that versus you're going to talk about it on my time?
Yeah, yeah. Man, it's just so hard because there's so much like anxiety that comes up in my chest. And I think the thing for me is that some of the stuff that we've went through, it's the fact of for those hours, my brain is coming up with all these things so that I can somehow think about it and then protect myself analytically because I'm a thinker in that way. So almost us not talking or letting her process, I'm left with myself overthinking about everything.
Well, and that goes back to do you structure or provide a process for disagreements or problems to be solved? So, like, do you have a good way to talk about problems where you're non-judgmental, you're both trying to understand each other's points of view? Like, are you trying to win the argument or are you trying to resolve a problem?
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to do that, if you're just trying to win an argument, then it's an unsafe position and no one feels in control.
Yeah.
But if you set up a time to where you can both be, number one, regulated to try to understand each other's points of view, then you have a much better situation to. It's kind of like, families do family meetings. Those are the times where we can bring up issues.
I just recently learned about that. I was like, that is so cool and amazing to just think that a mom and dad would sit down with a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old and say, hey, how am I doing in parenting?
Right. Yeah.
know?
One of my, yeah, absolutely. So Andy said something. Andy, loyal listener, Andy. So
yeah, I put that up. Reminds me of insecurity or your walls are up.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question, Doug, and resulting with trauma. What types of trauma have you seen in work with children as a therapist?
Too many examples. I mean, the usuals, like that most people probably think about. I mean, some intense abuse, sexual abuse, a lot of sexual assaults, a lot of situations where a step parent or whatever is sexually assaulting, girl or boy. I've seen, boys have been sexually abused, girls have been sexually abused. Domestic violence. I remember an example of a kid that I worked with, cute little girl. She's like 6 or 7 at the time. I can't even imagine how old she is now. She's probably, out of high school now, where the grandparent who used to take care of this girl a lot would tell me about how the parents were addicts and they were domestically violent frequently. And she walked into the house one day and the parents were throwing things at each other, screaming and yelling, and you just see the kid, Indian style, just staring at the TV, just like non-responsive, just sitting there like she had just checked out because that was her main coping because of, all this fighting and violence that happens around her. I mean, gang violence. Divorce is a common trauma for people. I mean, addiction. Parents are struggling with addiction. But then I've also had, kids that have experienced trauma through car wrecks or an ATV wreck, and it leads to a lot of trauma symptoms, reminder, and it's caused them difficulty. So most of it's been, relational trauma. But then we've also seen a lot of kids that have, what people don't realize is like, moving from place to place to place to place and never having a stable place to live and place to call home and things like that. That can be traumatic. There's a lot of social media trauma. loss, traumatic. I mean, grief becomes traumatic grief. So people losing, these pivotal people in their lives, and that they don't know how to deal with that. Just poverty, the things that can occur because of poverty, and I mean, there's just so many. I don't know. It's
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so something else too that I kind of found as a quote to kind of go with us talking about trauma is that, and let me know what you think about this, the reason we lack a strong connection with self is because we were taught our trauma is our fault.
In some situations, I would agree with that. I mean, I think people especially in where like we were talking about, you're not believed about your experience. I don't know if we have to be taught that it's our fault. We often go there anyways because we're trying to make sense of the trauma, and so we don't understand it. And but there are definitely some overt ways that the traumatizer, the abuser, makes them feel like it's your fault. If you would just have done this, or if you would just be, a compliant little whatever, if you would just do those things. So there definitely, I think that's a true statement. I just think that oftentimes, especially with, for example, sexual abuse, or where I see this, where it just naturally happens, doesn't have to be taught, is where one sibling's abused and the other one's not. Like the other one's assaulted, but the other one's not. Why me and not the other sibling? Or what, something's wrong with me for, or when I've had situations where kids have been sexually abused at such an early age that they don't even realize it's traumatic. They don't even recognize it as being wrong until they start meeting all these other people and find out, oh, that's not normal. And then it becomes really traumatizing years later because they realize that wasn't supposed to happen.
Wow.
So
I don't have this on my notes, but like if you're in a family and you're noticing peculiar things, or what, like with sexual assault and sexual abuse with kids and stuff, I mean, how can we take ways to help prevent those things from happening? I know that a lot of them are very secretive, like maybe there's no way to know, but what are some ways we as a society and other family members look out for certain behaviors or certain things that in normal spaces, like maybe it's Easter or maybe it's Christmas, where they can kind of see someone's acting different, or so, to kind of clue in to help prevent these things from happening?
Well, I think we need to create environments where people have the ability to talk about their experience without shame or retribution or whatever. So things stay secret when you don't give the ability for people to talk. This is kind of the ramifications of just making kids obedient. If you just make kids obedient, then the idea of them saying something like that is going to get shut down. Being a good listener, not just jumping on your assumptions, and just trying to understand and listen and have regular conversations with your kids. Teaching them about good touch and bad touch, and educating them about what is right and what is not, and
what's inappropriate.
What are appropriate boundaries and what are not. But giving kids a lot of experience that shows that they can talk about things, that they can be open, that they don't have to hide those things.
Have you, like, in your experience, have there been times for a traumatic experience for kids where they weren't believed, that they told a caretaker?
All the time.
Could you give an example? Like, was it like, my uncle did this, and then the mom's like, no, he was just
right. I mean, there's that stepfather abuse or stepmother abuse, but the person doesn't want to lose their relationship, so they don't they don't believe it, or they say you caused it, or you did this if you didn't do this.
I don't even know if it's something you could rationalize. How in the heck could you rationalize that you caused it? Like, for a kid, like, what would be an example if someone would use that to abuse? Like, say, well, you were acting out. I don't.
Well, I mean, for women, and I feel for women and their experiences, is that, if you didn't wear that dress, or if you didn't wear that type of outfit, then you wouldn't have attracted that, or, those type of things where people have to act in a certain way to prevent people from being abusive is really insane to think about that. But, but that's how people protect themselves, is blame others. I mean, think about just kind of how our society is of you know, and the violence that we're seeing in today's society, the shootings and all of that. We are, you know, if George Floyd just had cooperated with the police, none of this would have happened. Instead of, no, that's not, you know, that doesn't make what that cop did okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, so those things are,
I remember you saying back in, I can't remember what school it was, but when what was it, a white mom wouldn't wear a mask at a
football game.
At a football game. I remember this is when we kind of first had met each other, and I remember you talking about how irate you were about that. Was if that was a black person, if that was someone of, you know, that wouldn't have, just the grace that she was given because of
right. What would have happened if it was
Yeah,
somebody of color? Or,
yes.
You know,
Yeah. Well, I'm still on this too. Like, okay, but I can think about, like, you know, people blaming things and saying, like, if it's a teenager saying, well, you provoked him to sexually abuse you, these things, but like a child though, like, in what blaming universe could someone think a 7-8-year-old child's like, you asked for it? They're a kid.
Sure.
Like, what have there been? I'm just curious about what examples would be someone that would say that to a child. What would be an example of you caused that?
Well, I mean, or it's caused that, or maybe they, you know, or they just don't believe it. You're telling stories, or you're not being truthful, or that, you know, so and so could never have done that, so you're lying. It's not always that they caused it, but that they're not being truthful or honest about it. So, I mean, that certainly could happen. But ultimately, what I would say is, you know, for whatever reason, there is a reason why they're responding to that trauma, whether to protect their own integrity of their mind, or, you know, or they're fearful of, okay, now what? I'm, you know, like my survival is in jeopardy if I, you know. So it's not, those are definitely not good situations. But one of the worst things for our mental health is when these things are happening to people and people aren't being believed. So if my reality is I was just assaulted by somebody and no one believes me, then I start questioning my reality.
Oh yeah.
And that is debilitating for our mental health, when we start thinking that our reality isn't, you know, real. So
yeah. Well, let's go in more of a positive way, still talking about some of your examples professionally, but what are some positive stories or examples of you seeing resiliency in kids doing therapy?
You know, a lot of it's been, I think there was this person I worked with that was a lot older, and I just remember, you know, just transformation I mean, she was in her 70s or something like that, from traumas that have been 30 years old.
Wow.
And she's like starting to talk about how these memories are no longer kind of hijacking her brain, you know, that she's able to kind of, you know, not be so overtaken by these memories, and she feels happier, and you know, the ability to, you know, just have her experience change. I just think that people kind of transform from these experiences if they're given the right environment and support to do that, so that they can become stronger from it, or to make you know, not waste that opportunity to, you know, grow from it and turn something that is really tragic into something healthy and positive. And, you know, I think that's really, that's where therapy can really be helpful, is we can provide an environment where they can heal. And then that healing makes you stronger, because you take something that is the unpredictable, severe, and prolonged, and make it predictable and moderate, and then you have somewhat some control over it. And that's a pretty powerful thing.
Would you encourage someone that excuse me, would you encourage someone that doesn't have a strong relational support system to be in therapy, because they might not have anyone to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, I encourage everybody to be in therapy, but you know,
because I know you've mentioned it before, where it's like, hey, let's not get you into therapy. Like, even what you were talking about with your daughter, where it was like, we didn't just put her in therapy, we let her act it out. Like, I think that's one thing that I kind of learned from you is like, the first thing doesn't always have to be therapy. What other supports do you have that you can draw from? But if someone doesn't have those supports, and another thing too, what would be an example of an unsafe environment for friends? So some people would say, well, it's like therapy, just talking to my friends. I mean, venting, them listening to you, but what would be some environments where you're perpetuating the hurt and not building resiliency in a support network?
Environments where you're dealing with it through drugs and alcohol, where, people are self-destructing with you. Like one of the clients that I've worked with, she would kind of gravitate towards other kids that self-destruct so that they could co-self-destruct. So you're not trying to, there's power in group, but then there's also a lot of trouble from group. Like group can take you in a direction where you're healing together, but it can also have a negative slant and you go down these unhealthy roads.
Yeah.
So.
And so going back to children again, we actually talked about this, I think, on another live stream, but I wanted to bring it back up in talking about trauma. If I can find the scroll here for it. Okay, here we go. So question to ask you is, should children be allowed to say no to a parent?
Yeah. That's what we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my answer hasn't changed. I think what I said last time was that, it's not about, it's if the kid says no, what is going on in the environment or what's going on right now that is leading that kid to say no? What is, the kid has a reason for wanting to say no or for saying no. We just got to figure out what that reason is.
Yeah.
And that way we can try to understand it, because maybe there's a reasonable thing going on that we can take care of, that we can support. So yeah, I mean, ultimately it's how are we just are we trying to understand what's going on with that kid? And I always say that, my kids are more likely to say no to me when they're in a state of dysregulation. So when they're not feeling well, when there's something going on, they have to go to the bathroom, when they, whatever. And it's, dysregulation is the enemy to compliance. So, it's usually typically something's going on with the kid.
Yeah.
Because typically that's not usual. Most kids, when they're regulated and calm, are reasonable. They're going to want to help. They're going to want to support. They're going to want to do those things. So when they say no, something's going on, and we have to understand what that is.
Well, I wanted to bring this up again because we're talking about trauma, and you've mentioned, when I asked the question about what types of trauma, you've seen a lot of sexual abuse happen. And so, one thing when we talked about this last time is teaching kids that they can say no to an adult. I mean, if they're always, and how traumatic that might be for a child where an adult is abusing them and then they don't say no, how does that color their view for things? And they're never allowed to speak out or speak up or about their needs to a parent. I mean, I think that's why I wanted to bring that question up is should children be allowed to say no to a parent? Because you're also building, would this be correct in saying you're also building resiliency in the child?
You're building,
when they get older?
Yeah, you're giving them a voice, you're giving them an opportunity to, learn how they navigate the world and what responses are going to give them the results that they need or want, and what are results that are not going to be helpful for them. The other thing is I think the word allowed is kind of it's not my favorite word, because it's, what are you, it's not really it's this power hierarchy, power differential that you're creating of, I tell you what to do, you do what I say. And so the more power differential we create with people, the more stressed and the more evocative those interactions are going to be, in which case you are not allowing kids to be calm and thoughtful and logical and critically think. Yeah. You're putting them in a state of this robotic compliance, where that we're not helping them learn how to make good decisions. because we want them to be able to learn. Okay, so if they say no, and we have a conversation with them about why it's important or why we're concerned that they're not wanting to do something, then they can start learning about why they should be doing certain things, why they should, they shouldn't clean their room and do chores because mom and dad say so. We should be instilling some, functioning for them that when they live on their own, they should take care of their house.
Yes.
They should take care of their living space. They should, or help people out through helping each other out in their family and stuff like that. So there's a lot of.
When I was a kid, I had a lot of, I don't know if this is the right term, I don't know why, it's operational defiance with my mom, because she would always want it to be like a clean room. But as a kid, she never explained to me why.
Right.
It was just because I said so, because I want this clean, because people are coming over. And then as a kid, I would just always get angry. Like, this is so stupid. Why? It doesn't matter that there's socks on the floor. There doesn't matter that. And getting older now, I understand why she wants those things, because it makes her feel better. But that was never communicated to me. Maybe to make her feel better. Maybe because it makes me feel better. Maybe, I'm just not remembering that. But a lot of times it was never explained. I'm helping you build these characteristics. I'm helping you being able to regulate and being able to get up in the morning, and studies show that making your bed can make you maybe more productive. Or it's also like, if anyone's ever cleaned before or been in like a moment of like, I really want to organize and clean something. You're kind of acting something out there, right?
Well, a lot of people like to cope through cleaning.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Is there anybody out there that likes to cope through cleaning? I'm not one of them, but I know that there are people out there that like to clean as a way of coping. If Janice was listening, she'd probably, I think that's one of the things she likes to do.
Oh, she likes to clean?
Clean, or I think that's one of the.
Is that true, Kaylee? Kaylee's nodding her head.
Right. That's how I can kind of control my experience.
Kaylee, do you cope by cleaning? She would say so? Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I also think
it's rarely for me. I just want to say that to viewers. It's rarely for
Tracy
me.
says me with lots of ease, which is fine, and that's great, and more power to you. But, I would never want to clean to cope. It just, but
You'd rather hit a hockey puck into a net.
I would, especially laundry and dishes. Okay. I hate laundry.
Andy, I do not cope through cleaning. I cope with computer games.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Andy, quick question. When you play computer games, is it helpful for you to cope to like complete levels and to level up and stuff? Let me know if that's, because like cleaning is putting things in certain places and making things look good. But when you say computer games, Andy, is it like you completing a level or getting more, whatever game you're playing, is that kind of coping for you to complete that?
Well, some use books to escape, yes. That's kind of dissociative kind of practice, to just kind of escape through books or,
Yeah.
I just think that sometimes when people would say, well, I'm giving them chores because we're teaching responsibility, and I get that, but ultimately, what we think we're teaching doesn't guarantee that that's what they're learning. So I'm teaching responsibility by giving them chores doesn't mean that.
Do they see it as
that they see it that way?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
I didn't.
This idea of giving kids activities to teach them a character trait doesn't guarantee, because if my private logic about that is my parents are being, they just want me to clean their house because they don't want to do it themselves. Then that's not learning responsibility. Now, what does teach responsibility? Having responsible parents, having people that live responsibly.
Yes.
Demonstrate and role model responsibility. Most people learn that sense of responsibility from someone, not because someone made them do a chore. And I'm not saying don't make kids do chores, but what I'm saying is don't expect that that's the only thing, that's what they're learning just because you think that that's why you're teaching it.
Yeah. Andy just said to my question, sure does. It's an accomplishment. You feel good about it.
And then Tracy says, I like to have my kids, stepkids, to help me, which I also think is nice of the idea of helping, and is also the easiest way to get kids to engage is, hey, can you help me?
Yeah.
Kids are more likely to want to help than, hey, do this because it's your chore.
I'm trying to instill
This look at that chore wheel. It's your chore, and it's just kind of like, no, I mean, that doesn't like then. So then that dysregulates them, and then you're fighting, and there's this hospital or psychiatric hospital, and this doctor at the psychiatric hospital out in Oregon did like 10 years of research about all the precipitator or triggers to certain codes in the hospital, like restraints or whatever, and they all related to trying to force the client or patient to do something they didn't want to do. So getting forced, like the more rules you create, the more opportunity you have for kids to be defiant. Like you want to create an oppositionally defiant kid, create 1,000 rules, because you're gonna create those opportunities for So when you become very rule focused and not relationship focused, it's more of, I'm putting all these demands on you, and you have to follow these demands and be compliant and obedient.
Yeah.
Then you're gonna create, you're gonna lead to those types of behavior. So it's how you respond to, I think it just kind of goes back to that saying no. It's not about them saying no. It's about how you respond to them, and do you try to understand why they say no.
Yeah. That goes great into
See it as a chore necessarily.
Yeah.
Yes, they don't in those situations, right?
Yeah,
right.
having them help.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great segue into another quote that I had, Doug, is children are great imitators, so give them something great to imitate.
Right. Think about how you learn the English language. Did you go to school when you were an infant?
I just naturally spoke English when I came out of the womb.
Right, you just came right out. But it's through observation. It's modeling. I mean, most of what we learn is through modeling. It's through role modeling. It's observation. A huge way that we learn is through observation, especially when we're really young, especially when we're kids.
Yeah.
You think about it, it's like I think my wife always talks to me about it. It's like, if I had a son, teaching them to hold the door for women or whatever doesn't necessarily happen unless they see me do it.
Yeah.
Because it's how we live and how we behave and how we interact is really kind of sharing, is demonstrating to your child what we think is important and healthy.
And somewhere along the way, when we get older, we forget how, we kind of think kids are just oblivious, but they pick up on what's.
They observe everything. Well, my wife and I will be talking in the kitchen, and my kid will be in the den, down the way, and we'll be talking, and we think we're not talking loud, and she'll be like, my kid will be like, "What? What did you say? What?" And she'll come walking in and go, "What were you talking about?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, are you?"
Oh man.
Damn.
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah. Great discussions. I think another thing too I wanted to kind of maybe end on is that, because I was talking about it with you off air, but what does reparenting mean? And have you ever helped adults reparent themselves or get them to see that as kind of reparenting?
Well, I mean, I'm not well versed in the idea of or that process or that type of approach of reparenting, but I mean, ultimately it would be you're kind of in the way I often kind of would say it is you're giving experiences back that you should have gotten when you were younger. So by reparenting, where you should have received these type of experiences, you didn't get them, and so that led to these issues, these problems. You're gonna redo that, like you're kind of recreating. It's very Gestalt-like, which is like the empty chair of like you're putting yourself, you're speaking to your former self or your younger child or whatever, and trying to recreate these experiences that you should have received as when you were younger.
Well, because one thing that's I think it's I'm trying to learn more about myself with reparenting, which is just there's certain things in you where like you don't want to do something, or like it takes a lot of energy, but one example that recently I've been learning about in therapy is that there's like this voice inside of me that says the same voice when I was a kid was like, just do that in the morning. Just do your homework on the bus.
Procrastinator.
Procrastinator. And so for me, it's like learning now to reparent myself and say, no, let's like finding ways to motivate myself and to get myself to do those things. And I just think it's interesting because there's this like child voice in me that's oppositional and like, no, we don't want to do responsibility. No, that's not reasonable. Like this just defiant kid in me, it feels like, that doesn't want to do that. And so then there's another part of me that's just like needs to gracefully, instead of shame me, because a lot of it I would motivate myself to work out, motivate myself to do these things by shaming myself. So that was my, caregiver language to get me to do things. And so I just think that whole reparenting thing's very interesting as far as through my journey.
Yeah, you're trying to rewrite some of your templates, that have been developed in your upbringing, that the logic, the private logic that was created because of the way people spoke to you, and so one of the things that we talk about, for young parents is, or any parent is, the messages you give your kids growing up, things you say to them gets imprinted in their, schema or, beliefs about themselves and about others in the world and things like that.
Yeah, and we've mentioned like a quote before is that watch how you talk to your kids because it becomes their inner voice.
Right.
Yeah, which I thought, would that be considered like a schema? Would that be something that, would become a thought, like the brain, like a thought process, or?
I mean, it just becomes this kind of neural network that gets triggered every time you're in that similar situation. So, we have memory. We have different types of memory. So we have a state memory. So like, certain things are going to increase your heart rate, make you feel hot in your face or whatever based on that experience. And then you're going to have motor memory. So you might kind of get tense and maybe move your, you have some type of motor memory of an experience. And then you're going to have a relational, emotional memory to that. And then you're going to have a cognitive memory. And so that cognitive memory is the way you think about that experience, And so all of those play a role in how you react to those triggers,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we got another question. Thank you, Tracy, for your question here. Very good question. At what age do you believe these get instilled?
Well, so I go back to, I think I brought this up. There's a 10 brain rules. I forgot the author of the book, but he's like he's not biological. I can't remember what type of scientist he is, but he kind of equates us that our first 7 years or 6 or 7 years is really where our iPod gets programmed.
Yeah, you talked about that.
And then beyond those 7 years, it's we kind of take it from there. Like we start to kind of learn how to kind of think in the way we want to think and behave, function in the way we want to function, or respond or be governed by those beliefs. But that the first several years is really programming. Our views of ourselves, our identity, we're laying down these behavioral, emotional, cognitive templates in our brain that become, that kind of, make us function the way we function.
Yeah, I've heard the word, especially in like political literacy, is deprogramming.
Well, and so from a neurological perspective, and kind of speaking to what Tracy is talking about, typically our brain is organizing in those first 7 years of life, like the different systems in our brain are organizing. And so when we have these traumatic experiences or these types of experiences, it is shaping the way our brain and our systems are being organized. So our emotional brain is being shaped in certain ways based on our experiences. Our state system, a system that controls our states, like our heart rate and blood pressure, that's being organized in a certain way based on our experiences. And so at a certain point, it becomes less about, our brain stops really organizing and more what we call myelinating, which is strengthening these neural networks through experience. So the more and more I do something, the stronger that network becomes. And what happens is this myelin sheath goes around this network. It's kind of like the coding of an audio visual cable. This cable right here becomes So it creates clearer, cleaner, more efficient communication of these networks. And so our like adolescence and going into early adulthood is really about myelination of these neural networks, not about necessarily organizing these networks. So now it doesn't mean that new neural pathways can't be created. They can be created. It just takes a lot more effort. It takes a lot more work to do that.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Really, it's almost like I one of my favorite quotes right now that's really helped me is that you have to be able to name it to face it. And so when I learn things like today, learning these things from you, it almost takes the shame out. I think for me, my personal experience, it takes so much shame out of it where it's just like, this is reality. It's not that you're a bad, evil person. It's just that there's things you have to work on, things you have to build on, skills that you have to do. And it's very encouraging because it also encourages me that, hey, this is something I can get better at. This isn't my identity. This is something I can improve on in my own way and through my own, experiences.
Well, and I'm thinking about I'm dealing with something right now with one of my clients that the parent is really suffering and really struggling. And, it's unfortunately, she's becoming very vulnerable because of these unpredictable things that are happening in her life. And it's making her very vulnerable. And so, unfortunately, when we get hit with a lot of unpredictable, severe experiences, it creates that vulnerability. And so we have to find ways to make things more predictable, find ways to be more in control of our experience and the way we respond to things so that we can become resilient from them and not become so vulnerable to it. And it's hard. I'm not speaking to this like it's easy, but it does. We often become hostage to these unpredictable experiences and we don't know how to get out, we don't know how to find our way out. And so,
absolutely. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Tracy, thank you for the comments. Andy, Abby, for all commenting. Yep. Oh yeah.
Kim, wait in the beginning.
Yep. Kim in the beginning. I know that I get a lot of enjoyment out of people interacting because that means that they're interested and they want to learn. And speaking up about these things and learning about these things is going to help a lot of people suffering just to get the knowledge, just to even have the steps on what do I do. Even when Kim at the beginning of the live stream was saying, what if revisiting is a trigger for not good memories? Like, how can we take small steps and being better and more resilient and learning more skills? And so make sure to follow us on Instagram under the Resilient Purpose Podcast and also on YouTube. We have a lot of great podcasts coming out. We have a really good one out right now with Hussein Habab.
Yeah.
With his experience. We labeled it international.
Has anybody watched it that's listening? Has anybody watched it?
Which was just a really great one. And so, have anyone watched it yet? It's on our YouTube channel and on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yeah.
So all the plugs.
No, I think you'll be impacted by it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And really what Hussein had done was simply just shared his experience. I think maybe a lot of times we feel like we don't have a right to share experiences.
Andy watched it.
Yeah.
I think you put I.
Yeah. Andy, what did you think before we hop off here? What did you think of, what did you get out of it? How did it encourage you by watching it? And Doug and I actually filmed something this morning talking about our experience with it and what we got out of it.
Not yet. Well, Tracy, what are you waiting for? Go watch it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, you should take your time. Take your time to watch it.
Yep.
And if you like it, write a 5-star review.
Yep.
At least on Apple or one of those.
Yeah.
I don't know where you can do all these.
Apple.
Yeah.
Oh, Andy said it's deep.
It's deep. It is deep.
Yeah.
It is deep, but I talk about this one where we've had a couple episodes where we've talked about people who've lost to suicide. This is somebody that attempted, didn't succeed, and recovered from it. So we've always wanted to kind of bring someone on who could speak to that. I was in this intense moment of despair, and I was able to kind of recover from it, for whatever.
Yeah, and just to listen to his story about how he try to take his life. I mean, it just
Thank you, Andy. It's
Yeah.
touching at the same time. So
yes, yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't want to scare people that it's over deep, but
Yeah.
and he is he's very personable and fun with the conversation and just
He is, yeah. He was even asking you. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of times in these podcasts, people don't always ask
they
you
don't want to ask
questions.
me questions, and I wish they would.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thanks again, guys. We have a lot of fun doing these live streams and answering your questions and talking about different topics and stuff. And so remember to follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Apple Podcasts if you're on Spotify, and also Instagram. We have a lot of great content coming up. And we will...
What are we doing next week? Is that Improbable? Original Strength?
Original Strength.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome. So I'm excited.
Doug's favorite?
One of my, yeah.
One of your favorites, yeah?
Yeah. Tim Anderson and Danny Almeida from Original Strength, a group out of North Carolina. And we talk about pressing reset and the benefits of that from a mental health perspective. So they work in the physical fitness world, but they use this concept called pressing reset, which resets your nervous system, which, as I was learning learning from them, and have read in some of his books and stuff like that, was that, oh my gosh, this totally makes sense for the mental health world. Like the nervous system plays a huge role in our fight or flight response, our stress response. So by pressing reset, we can reset our nervous system. We can regulate ourselves and be healthier that way.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of fun. I
need to get on there because I know these things. It's like you learn something and it's like you don't apply it or you don't try it.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I need to do that, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, anything else you have to say, Doug?
No, I don't think so. Well, I don't know. Is everybody enjoying this? I'm hoping people will say
Yeah.
that they're enjoying this and find value. So I would also encourage, if they want us to talk about something or they want
Yes.
to suggest, if you have somebody that may be of interest that you'd like to hear from, as like a possible guest on the podcast, we could certainly try to reach out.
Absolutely.
But that's where I was like, the more interaction, the more engagement we can get, the more access we have to people that I think can bring value to this area. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for watching today, and we'll see you soon on another Resilient Purpose live stream. See
Later.
you guys.